Hey everyone, it's Jonathan, and welcome to the first episode of the Joncast in 2025. Today's episode comes courtesy of Trivial Theater, or at least I'm assuming it's from her. About a year ago, a mysterious package showed up in my mailbox, and inside was the 1966 Batman movie starring Adam West. There was no return address, no note, no indication of where this came from, and the only thing I could think of was that Nicki sent it to me, because, well, who else would send me this with no explanation? Also, she had been saying we should watch it for quite a while. So obviously we had to do a podcast on it. It took us a while to actually get to it, but better late than never. We got Dan from TYTD Reviews to join us, and we had a great time discussing this bizarre piece of Batman history. As someone who grew up with Batman the Animated Series, a Batman cartoon that feels more grounded and gritty than a lot of live-action Batman that are out there, I was not prepared for this Batman, which feels more like a cartoon than the actual cartoon Batman that I grew up with. So I was not very familiar with this show. Like, I knew it existed, but I had never seen it. Like, I would consider myself a Batman fan, but that's mostly because I grew up with Batman the Animated Series and I love that Batman. But like any other Batman I've seen, it just doesn't feel exactly right. Like, I watched the Christopher Nolan Batmans too, and everybody loves them. They're so amazing. And like, they're fine, but they weren't Batman the Animated Series. So that specific Batman is like the Batman that is Batman to me. So I wanted sort of to see this one, but like I knew it was supposed to be like the silly Batman. So it wasn't
That's a
like
very silly Batman.
Oh, yes.
it never felt like a priority because I knew it was not going to feel like Batman. Like even like I've never seen the 80s or 90s, early 90s Batmans either. And I would have assumed a few years ago that I would eventually watch them first. Because like they weren't ever a high priority either.
Yeah,
Just because
that's
like I
fair.
know they're not going to be Batman the Animated Series. I do want to watch them eventually though.
Hmm.
They are fun.
So this one was not a priority, but I'm glad I watched it. And yes, it was very silly.
Well, and a lot of I know that this over the course of time has had a rough time because because it was so silly compared to what had come previously or after. Especially if you're talking like the 80s, you had Frank Miller with a very, very dark version of The Dark Knight. This was kind of poo-pooed quite a lot because it was quite silly. But it does have there's just something about it, you know?
Hmm.
At least for me.
I think it's the fact that it just does not take itself seriously at all. Like I was reading online, people were talking about like a lot of people call this a parody, but really it's just the state of the comics at that time. And I was watching, I was like, how can you see this as anything other than a parody? This feels like a parody.
I would agree.
Like that's so purposely silly. Like there was nothing about this that felt like you were supposed to take it seriously.
Well, here's the thing with that, and I do agree. It does feel very parody. It's silly beyond belief. And if you get into the actual series, it gets weird and goofy. And it
Hmm.
certainly does reflect like if you look at like Get Smart or but besides things like Star Trek, a lot of what came about in that time and place was very like kitschy and kind of weird just because it was trying to follow the culture at that time. But you can see a lot of like commentary in this like there's different times where Batman and Robin will have little asides about the fact that you sold a free atomic submarine to some guy and you didn't get his address. Like moments like that. It is deeply kind of making statements and whether it was what the writers thought or whether it was just a goofy aside like oh government want it still is there.
With that scene specifically, I was wondering, is this a commentary on a specific figure that I don't know, or is it just supposed to be silly?
I could see it going both ways because when they when they have the unseen president, he's got a beagle with him, and Lyndon B. Johnson would have been president at that time, and he had beagles, incidentally named him and her. So that was accurate.
That was the names of the Beagles,
Yes,
not in this movie, in real life.
in real life.
Okay. Really creative at names.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good quantifier, though, for why this works as well as it does, is had this just been like silly, goofy weirdness, but mindless. I think it could have become very, very irritating very, very quickly.
Hmm.
It's the fact that you can tell that the people who are writing this are very well tuned in with current culture and, the current sort of political landscape and the way that the world is, and that they are being playful, but there is that undercurrent underneath where you know that they know how to write good rather than just writing aimlessly.
Hmm.
I think that's the thing that ultimately really wins me over on this one because, like I say, it would be so easy to just do a big silly daft film with people running around and pie fights and exploding sharks, but it's the fact that you can tell that the writers are clever. The Simpsons is very similar. The Simpsons, had it not had the caliber of writer behind it that it had, it could have been just very silly, sort of over the top cartoon weirdness. But it's because you've got these people like Conan O'Brien behind the scenes who knew what the way of the world was at the time, that
Hmm.
they're able to kind of playfully jab at it without it coming across as snidey almost.
Well, I feel like this is kind of both. Like it was definitely silly, over the top weirdness because like the whole thing with the shark, and then he wants shark repellent spray, but then he has to choose from barracuda, whale, or manta ray spray. It's like that they are purposely being very weird and silly, but all in a way that's actually funny and not just, oh, we're making a thing for kids. Who cares?
Mm,
Exactly.
yeah.
Now, if you get into later incarnations, because they do some variety specials, in the 70s, where I'm pretty sure that it was Adam West and Burt Ward that reprised their roles, and it does turn into more of that, silly for the sake of silly sketch type thing.
Mm,
But
Mm,
and it's weird the and not to tangent, but you look at the show and you kind of get it did start a little bit more serious. Like it still maintains a lot of its goofy, but the first few episodes of the first season are within reason, within the scope of this universe, actually a little bit darker. Like
hmm.
the lighting isn't as bright, the characters aren't as, it's more grounded relative to the time.
Well, I didn't realize that this movie took place in the middle of the series. I was thinking that this was like the beginning of the series. And I remember you had been talking about how it started more serious. And I think I was expecting something slightly more serious with this. And I didn't realize until like I started looking up behind the scenes stuff and making of and realized, oh, wait, this is not the beginning of the series. This was in the middle.
See, and I might have told you that accidentally because Dan righted me on that too, which I felt really bad about. It's like, oh God, I've been leading people wrong. Because it does sort of set itself up, and for that era, for a lot of superhero properties like Spider-Man and things like that, they did start off with like a hour and a half type movie deal, and then on one side, it was a big kind of hype for, ooh, look at what we created, but it also
Hmm.
gave them access to footage that they could reuse of, like, say, the Batcopter or big crazy stunts that a bigger budget would allow them to do that they could reuse later too.
Hmm.
one of the things I do really enjoy about this film as well is that they don't that there is it's essentially they take everything that works with Batman 66, the TV series, and you just transfer it wholesale into a film format. Like, this is essentially just an extended episode of the TV series with a bigger budget and a bit more aspiration behind it in terms of
Yeah.
what it wants to be, which is perfect because, I love the TV series. I think it's fantastic. And I think that this is a really good jumping on point. Triv mentioned it as well to me that she thought it was a good jumping on point for people who'd not seen the series before because of that. I mean, for me, it's even just small things. It's the fact that, like, for example, the opening of the film, 3 minutes and 30 seconds in, you are watching Batman and Robin in the Batmobile with an explanation of who they are, what they do, what's happening, what's going on, and then it just gets into the action straight away. And bearing in mind the opening titles are 2 minutes long. Um, it's like it doesn't miss a beat. Every single moment in this film is perfectly timed to happen
Hmm.
exactly when you want it to happen. Um, and it doesn't really uh, outstay its welcome because even the bits that feel a little bit fillery are still fun. They're just like strange, weird moments, like the bit where they're tied to a buoy and they keep getting missiles fired at them, and Batman's got bat signal jammer device that can blow up the missiles, and he does two, but he can't do the third one because the batteries are dead, which I am disappointed they didn't get a new set of batteries to use on that one.
But that whole thing, I was just like, why don't you take off your belt?
Oh, absolutely.
That is a good question. You don't take off your belt in the field.
It's because had they not done that, they wouldn't have been able to kill a porpoise off screen.
so dumb, but in a really hilariously dumb way.
Oh yeah.
The noble porpoise sacrificed itself. You didn't see it, but it happened.
It's a great thing of trust me, bro.
There was a few of those in this movie. I realized that they did not have that big of a budget. Like they made a huge thing about the exploding octopus, and then you never see the exploding octopus.
You know, explosive budgets don't come cheap, and they had to explode the shark, so you know.
They could only afford so many exploding equine mammals.
I would add to the attention to detail in the background, especially in the I guess everywhere in the Bat Cave as well as the crime lair. The crime lair stands out to me though because there was there was a bookshelf and there was like riddles ? There's like props for the Joker, and then there was like Penguin's fish food, and there was an aquarium with a couple of fish, and then there's like an entire like file cabinet of assorted glitter, like broken out by color.
The riddles in this thing too. Like they were so specific, and they had very specific answers that led to a specific conclusion. And then I was like, why is the Riddler is obviously he's giving them something so cryptic that no one would ever understand, but like it leads them exactly where they need to go. I was just like, why is the Riddler telling them everything?
I just like that the answers to the riddles are so left field as well. It's like, you know, they put something up and Robin within a heartbeat goes, "It's a banana." And it's like, what? How did you get banana from that?
A pigeon with a shotgun.
And one of the answers was egg, but it was supposed to mean hope, and then hope led to something else. Like everything about this was so convoluted, but in a way that was like, you know that they are doing it on purpose because it's ridiculous.
And the delivery too of all of them. I mean, Adam West just
they were
nailed.
So serious.
Oh yeah, and he nailed the depth, like everything about it. He said it with such confidence.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Yeah.
That whole scene, that was so weird. What was with those two ladies eating a mound of crabs unfazed by anything around them?
Because they got those crabs, gosh darn it, and they were going to eat them. Yeah, that's such a classic. That whole bomb scene is so classic. Like looking at it now, looking at it then, it is such a slapsticky, just weird thing. There's no way you can't laugh at it and just go, what the? You laugh at it in spite of what it is.
It's followed not too far off from the jetpack umbrella scene as well.
Oh, I love
just
that.
Sent me straight to Puff and Stuff territory.
What was with Catwoman making those horrible cat noises while they were flying through the air?
She was having a good time. Let her have a good time.
I will say, like, she did that on more than one occasion, and I loved the one pirate guy just giving her a look like, what is wrong with this lady?
I just felt so sad for the cat that Catwoman was carrying around in all the scenes that clearly looked traumatized. Like, every scene it's in.
Well, especially like she used him as a weapon. Like like the one scene towards the end where they're all fighting and she's just looking down on them and she just tosses the cat at Batman. Batman cared more for the cat than she did because he put her in a life raft to get it to safety.
This would have never have happened under Eartha Kitt, I'm just saying.
Fair. Well, and just some of the classic seven. John, I don't know how well you know kind of the ins and outs of the behind this, but the guy that played Joker was by the name of Cesar Romero, and he had a mustache that he would not shave. So like the makeup covers up his mustache, but it is still so clearly his mustache.
I think Cesar Romero is the one person, like, I vaguely know who most of these people are, but Cesar Romero is the only one that I know who he is because he starred in three of my favorite movies from when I was a kid. Do you guys know what the Medfield trilogy is?
I
It's a trilogy of Disney movies from the 60s. They are absolutely ridiculous. But Cesar Romero plays the villain, AJ Arno, the computer wore tennis shoes. Now you see him, now you don't, and the strongest man in the world. It's like weird sci-fi college Disney movies. Like it's about these college students that they're all like work in a science lab and they have all these weird inventions. But AJ Arno, played by Cesar Romero, for some reason always just I don't even know why he's so connected to these kids, but they always end up fooling his plans. Like he's fixing some sort of a gambling scheme in one thing. There was a lot of gambling rings in 60s and 70s Disney movies.
can see that.
But he was like the main villain. So he's like iconic to me because of these obscure movies that nobody knows about except for apparently me. Because uh, I'm sure I've mentioned it before, but like for like a couple of years, my uncle had cable. We did not. But at night he would just put in a VHS and hit record on Disney Channel. And I would just get whatever played in the middle of the night. So I got all of these old, obscure Disney movies, including The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes, Now You See Him, Now You Don't, and The Strongest Man
Oh,
in the World.
cool.
Which
Nice.
those three became some of my favorite weird, obscure Disney movies. But Cesar Romero was like one of the best parts. But also Kurt Russell was the star of those. So everybody knows Kurt Russell now, but he was just a kid back then.
Oh yeah. That's awesome.
One of these days, I want to do that for the Disney movie marathon. Maybe you guys should join me for those because if you haven't seen them, you need to. They're hilarious.
Okay.
Absolutely.
They're probably terrible, but they're hilarious.
Well, I mean, it means something to you when you were a kid. That's huge. So,
Yeah.
no, I'd be happy
Hmm.
to.
Yeah.
I feel like even if they're not good in the normal sense of being good, they're good in the sense of they're just weird. They're weird 60s, 70s Disney weirdness. Disney did a lot of weird things back then. All their
Yes,
live
they
action
did.
movies were strange. But Cesar Romero was great.
It was a wonderful time for cinema where sort of that strange science fiction element was really in full swing. I mean, you had things
Yes.
like the Nutty Professor and the Monkey's Uncle and
No,
all
that's
that good
another one that
stuff.
I got when I was from that era of taping stuff in the middle of the night. The Monkey's Uncle.
Oh, phenomenal opening song.
Yes, I love that song. Which I found out later that was actually the sequel to another movie called The Misadventures of Merlin Jones, which I didn't see until years later.
Blimey.
Those are two other movies that I want to do for the podcast.
Oh, absolutely. If you like that kind of stuff, there's a slight tangent here. If you like that kind of stuff, I can recommend Zots if you haven't seen Zots before.
Oh, Zots is crazy.
Yeah.
I don't think I've heard of that. It sounds like a weird candy.
It
But it is
it is a
actually a
weird
candy.
candy.
Yeah.
Really?
Like in the
Yeah,
real
yeah,
world,
yeah.
it is. This is Zots was done by William Castle, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I couldn't remember for sure. Been a minute.
It's kind of an absent-minded professor film like The Nutty Professor, but it's about a scientist who invents is he invents a magic ring or he finds a magic ring that when he says the word Zots, crazy things happen. And depending on the scene is depending on what crazy thing happens. So like if he's falling out of a window, he'll say Zots and he'll suddenly start floating. Or if he's in a party full of people, he'll say Zots and the party will just be filled with rats for some
This sounds
reason.
weirdly familiar. I wonder if I saw that and just forgot about it. Is it a Disney movie?
No, but it's Columbia Pictures, so it's not like a third party company or something. But the trailer for it is very striking.
There's something about that just sounds very like a weird thing that I might have forgotten about.
Hopefully, we'll rediscover it in future and maybe be able to talk about it sometime.
Maybe we should. That sounds so like it doesn't sound familiar, but it does sound familiar.
We have done that thing again where we deviate. We should be back on the porpoise killing. That's what we need. We need to pull.
You did that on purpose, didn't you?
That was another one. I loved Adam West's delivery when they were demonstrating the dehydration machine and they were dehydrating the gangsters. And Robin was like, well, good riddance. And Batman turns to him and says, no, Robin, every one of them has a mother. Like, okay.
The whole thing with the dehydrating the bad guys and then they suddenly they turn to antimatter or whatever. I was like, this is like existential horror played for comedy. Like, if you
Yes.
Yeah.
think about what happened to them, that's horrifying.
Well, think about the poor bad guy that when they were fighting, he ended up on that giant Jack in the Box thing, went through the air and got thrust into the arms of an exploding octopus.
That you never saw.
Yes.
That did make me laugh though. He was the one guy that sprung the trap. It was so dumb,
Why
but
did the
in a good
octopus
way.
need to explode?
Because it's an exploding you
They're
absolutely have
villains.
to.
They already exploded a shark. Now they have to do an octopus to complete
Yes.
that.
I mean, it's a pretty straightforward thing.
Do you reckon one of the writers for Batman 66 was just like a grizzled sea captain who hated the sea at the point he was writing?
Quite
Yeah, and
possibly.
then we blow up the porpoise.
I need to explode a shark, and then a porpoise, and then an octopus.
I hate the sea and everything in it. But yeah, I mean, I like I said at the before we hit record on this one. This one is kind of open and shut for me. I wish I had more nuance and more kind of depth to go into with this, but just the whole thing is from minute one to the finale just mesmerizingly enjoyable to me. I think the direction and cine is fantastic. I love the fact they use Dutch angles as regularly as they possibly can for almost every scene. I love the campiness of it. I think all of the Batman villains in it are kind of in their peak understanding of how the characters work. The only thing that kind of slowed it down was two things for me. One is I think that it would have been interesting to see this get split out into maybe a 3 or 4 part TV edition where they kind of actually put the cliffhangers in and make it have the pacing of a TV show, because it does feel like those natural cliffhangers are there throughout the film at the sort of right junctions.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, I thought the very end was a little bit slow, where they go back to the European headquarters and resurrect everybody, and there's like a couple of minutes where they're just kind of standing looking at the dust and not a lot's happening. I get it's supposed to build tension, but
All of that was so convoluted. Like
yeah.
not that the whole movie wasn't like it was all convoluted, but like by the end it was just like, what is happening here? The 9 world leaders or whatever, the whole thing with them having, it was supposed to be like some sort of a world summit for peace or whatever. I don't know what was going on, but they were all
It was
arguing.
basically the UN Security Council.
Yeah, but they were all, no, who could understand any of that? None of them were
Well, that
speaking
was
the
the
same
point.
language.
Well, and that's the thing and that's I think kind of the point of it was because at the beginning they're not speaking they're all speaking different languages there too.
Yeah.
But here they're all screwed up, like the French guy is speaking Swahili and the British guy is speaking, French or whatever. So because they despite Batman and Robin's best efforts, they kind of something was lost in translation with all the dust.
I'm sure that whole thing was supposed to be a commentary on politics too. But
Oh yeah.
again, I overthink things, and I'm like, how are they supposed to even have any sort of a discussion? Because even before they get their languages mixed up, none of them are speaking the same language.
Exactly.
I just love the fact that once all the languages accidentally get swapped over, everybody just kind of looks at each other and goes, okay, fine, whatever. And then the film just ends. Just like, yeah, you figure it out. Bye.
Live long and prosper.
I also thought the whole thing with them like having to go back to the UN or whatever it was to resurrect them. Like, why couldn't you just do it in the Batcave? You already have everything there.
Because they barely have room for 2 people in that car, much less 12 or 11.
Maybe they could dehydrate him again,
I just
save some space.
thought it was so weirdly hilarious that they had to take them back to that room and rig up that whole contraption with the thing that looked like a punch bowl with a garden hose attached.
I think that was the only thing. Did that have a name, like a descriptor on it? Like, world leader rehydration unit or something like that?
No, it just said something like light water.
Oh, that's right. Light,
Because they had the
soft
whole
water.
thing.
Light, soft
Yeah.
water, yeah.
They had the whole thing about the reason that they turned into antimatter was because the water was too heavy.
Yeah, because of they have the nuclear powered Batcave thing.
So they had to make sure to label this water as light water.
Yes. Well, you want to make sure people know. I would also like another kind of one of those little things that I'm sure they probably got calls on was the fact that you see them like buckling their seatbelts.
I noticed that they made very clear to point the camera at the seatbelt being buckled.
And that's I think that's probably a thing from the series too. They probably had concerned mothers going, "Well, you have these young men riding around town at all speeds and no seatbelts."
At the beginning, at some point, there was a line about respecting the police or something like that.
Oh yeah. And then there's the cheeky there's like multiple places where there's a couple making out. Like when the bomb was going off in the bar, and then like at the beginning, like the opening credits.
There was more making out than I expected, and also the scene where Batman is supposed to be making out with Catwoman, but it's like both of them are in disguise. Well, he's not in disguise, he's like Bruce Wayne. But like that was the most awkward, unromantic kiss.
Yeah.
He looked like he wanted to be anywhere but there.
And with that, I don't know if that was like, I suppose they would say that he's more about justice than anything else. Like he's there to protect her more than to engage in romance. But yeah.
I just find it a bit bizarre that technically on paper, Adam West's Batman is the strongest Batman. Like, in terms of if you could put him up against all the other Batmen, he's the one that has like the anti-bat repellent and all of the bat vehicles and everything that the other Batmen either only have one or two of or have none of.
That was the 60s. It was easier for it to come by all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, barely a day went by in 1967 without somebody tripping over a Batcopter.
Well, not to mention, apparently his suit can repel shark teeth because the shark was chomping and chomping and chomping on his leg and they didn't have a scratch. So either he's superhuman or I want some of whatever his pants are made out of.
And the names of everything. The fact that it's like at least a 3-word name and at least one of the words is like 12 letters long.
And everything has to have the word bat in there somewhere.
Oh yeah. Bat signal, bat copter,
bat shark repellent spray.
Yeah, even with the villains, like Catwoman's like little transmitter was in the shape of a black cat and
And when
sounded
she was
like
doing the Morse code, it sounded like a cat. Meow, 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 meow. I'm died with the villains listening in and it's just mewing at them.
I love the fact that the bombs with the riddles in are like write a paragraph when they explode.
And it was always a Polaris type missile. It wasn't just a Polaris missile or a missile. It was a Polaris type missile.
I wondered if they just bought some stock footage from somewhere and they didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
Like the missile says Polaris, we gotta say it.
One of my favorite parts of this whole thing was watching Cesar Romero's kind of almost like rubber hose physical acting in this. Like every time he got a command or an instruction, his entire body would just convulse and stretch into this strange kind of jaunty runaround. There was a particular moment where he was asked to launch a missile, and it was like his entire body got crushed into the shape of a car tire, and he sort of exploded out of the corner of the room to the missile launch section.
Well, and even there's such a manic energy with Riddler. Frank Gorshin, the guy that plays him, just I don't know what he had, like coffee or what that morning, but my God. Like I don't like they balanced Joker and Riddler pretty well as far as the kinds of energy that they brought forth, I thought.
I forgot to say too, I did actually recognize the Riddler because Frank Gorshin, he played one of the bank robbers in That Darn Cat, which is another of my favorite Disney.
That's a fun one.
Disney 60s movies.
Well, I'm sure a lot of those guys, because I mean, this was even though this was a movie that was released in theaters, it was a glorified TV thing. And, all those guys, they kind of go back and forth. Like the amount of guest starring that a lot of them did, back and forth was pretty consistent. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, you've got Ernest Borgnine, fresh out of the Twilight Zone, about to go into Rocky. So that's.
Yeah. Oh, you mean Burgess Meredith?
Burgess Meredith, even, yeah.
Yep.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I think that we're all kind of in very sort of similar agreement that this film was just fun and
Oh yeah.
quite interesting. I mean, I don't know, Jonathan. Obviously, I don't want to speak for yourself. Obviously, this was the first time you'd seen this one, but I mean, it was the first time I'd watched it, and I had a real hoot with it. It really
Mhm.
does just feel like a bigger budgeted, slightly better structured version of the TV show, which I loved anyway. So
I just thought it was ridiculous. Like half the time, like I was trying to take notes and watch at the same time, and I didn't have a lot of time this week, so I knew I wasn't gonna have time to watch it twice. I feel like I need a second watch to really understand because like I would look down to type something and I look up and they would be doing something totally different. I'm like, how did we get from here to here? Like it was very convoluted, but I was still able to follow the story because essentially it's got to be so the kids can follow it. But the way the whole thing was structured was just like ridiculous thing after ridiculous thing. But it wasn't ridiculous in the sense of like because I've seen a lot of ridiculous in a bad way movies. This was just like ridiculous for ridiculousness sake. So it was fun.
I do think too that it was, a certain they had a I mean, definitely rewatch this when you have the chance because there is some nuance and whatnot to this. It's not a deep movie by any stretch, but there is rhyme or reason to it. But honestly, the way they go from thing to thing, there's not a lot of actual story other than okay, there's this evil organization of people they want to take over the world. They captured this yacht with a British Commodore and they're holding him in a cell where
When he has no idea he's even been captured. He's
no,
ordering tea like they're his servants or whatever.
absolutely. There's like random henchmen outside like with a fin on and he's like, blowing into a horn and trying to move the thing back and forth to make it look like the
I think the thing that was hardest to follow was just the thought process of the bad guys planning their ridiculously convoluted schemes. Like they have to dress Catwoman up as a Moscow reporter from the Moscow Bugle, which was just the thought of somebody in Russia naming their newspaper the Moscow Bugle just made me laugh. But having her pretend to be this person to lure Bruce Wayne, who they don't know is Batman, into a trap so that they can kidnap Bruce Wayne so that Batman will come in and save him, so that they can put him in this thing that will launch him into the ocean with an exploding octopus. Every plan they came up with was so convoluted, but everything seemed to just work how they needed it to work, even if they were foiled in the end.
it
yes,
gives long Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote vibes.
it very
Actually,
much does.
that's kind of true. This felt like a live action cartoon for the most part. If this had been animated, it wouldn't have
Right.
felt any different.
Oh, 100%. And that's kind of the whole series. It kind of does that. Like if you go to the normal episodes, like the only thing that this was really missing that I don't know how you would have incorporated it, but it certainly would have added something to it. You get the narrator at the open and the close talking about kind of what's going on, and then he'll kind of break in throughout. And you don't get like the crazy weird like traps that trap Batman or Robin. Like they've been in everything from a giant percolator to I don't know, like giant freezy machine to anything and everything you could possibly imagine as a thing to hold them in place. And that was always the climax where it would cut away and say same bat time, same bat channel.
It's also funny that you mentioned the animated aspect to it because they actually, in recent years, in the last sort of 10, 15 years, did two animated sequels to this movie. They did one called Batman Return of the Caped Crusaders, which is basically round two. They get all of the baddies back in and they have them try to take out Batman and Robin again, which features at least one scene where they get tied to a giant TV dinner and fed into an oven. Um, which
Again,
is
this is pretty
great.
run of the mill when you're talking the actual series. Like that is the
Yeah,
the level of goofy trap that they fall into.
yeah, yeah. And then they did a sequel to Return of the Cape Crusaders called Batman versus Two-Face. Two-Face was famously not in Batman 66. He never made it to the TV series. So they decided to introduce him in this animated special, and they got William Shatner to play him. Um,
That actually seems like perfect casting, even if he had done it back then.
Oh
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, they animate him to look like William Shatner from the '60s, but like obviously they do the split down the middle. They're both good. I mean, I enjoyed them both. So if you enjoyed this film and wanted more of the same, the two animated specials are pretty much more of this, basically.
Oh yeah.
I knew those existed. I don't think I knew that they were supposed to be like direct continuations of this series. Because like DC makes a bunch of animated movies, and for a while I was trying to keep up with them, and I'm probably like 10 years behind now. I want to eventually get back into watching those. But yeah, I knew that those existed. I didn't realize that they were part of this.
Yeah. No, absolutely. They actually, in the Return of the Cape Crusaders, they do reference the film quite heavily as well in places. They'll sort of bring up, the last time they all teamed up to try and take down the Bat. But they also reference other Batman shows through it as well. I think the animated series gets a couple of nods as well.
Yeah.
Things like that, which is quite good.
And you will
Also,
also go ahead, sorry.
oh no, it's just a quick one. I was also going to say it only just occurred to me that the Catwoman's alias is Kitka, which is basically Kitty Cat. But
Hmm.
Yep. The only other thing I was going to add was a lot of even like because I think people look at Batman 66 and they have kind of there are people that love it. There are people that say it's not true to what the Batman is and all that stuff based on your experiences. But you will see a lot of nods to like this movie and the series in general throughout a lot of Batman properties, especially the animated ones.
Hmm.
Like you'll see the shark repellent shows up all the time. The bomb stuff will show up occasionally. There's a lot of little bits here and there, so.
didn't Adam West turn up in the animated series playing like a
The Gray
Batman-esque character?
Ghost.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's probably
So,
the first time that I was really aware of him and who he was. Maybe not right away, because I think that I probably would have found that on the internet, so it would have been back when the first series first aired, but later when I bought the DVDs of the animated series and started like looking up people who were in it, that's when I became more aware of this series, the early Batman. But I've known Adam West as a voice actor more than I've known him as a live action. I don't know if I've seen him in live action before this because I'm just so used to him just being a voice actor. And a lot of times when he's a voice actor, they reference something to do with Batman, the series, or this movie. So I've always been aware of this and I've always been aware of him. This is the first time I've ever gotten around to watching it.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's funny because like Fred McMurray with My Three Sons, he plays or Adam West here, he plays such a wholesome, straightforward character. And then
Hmm.
you look at a lot of the other stuff that he did, and he had a tendency to play more complex characters. Like, and it was obviously, a person can play several roles, but I think that he did sort of gain a reputation with this that kind of stuck with him.
I can see why. Like I watched some of the behind the scenes stuff on the DVD. I haven't mentioned on the podcast. I got this DVD mysteriously in the mail from
What?
someone who may or may not be on this podcast
I have
with
no idea what you're talking about.
with no return
What?
address. It just
Huh?
appeared.
What?
So I
What a
watched.
weirdo. What? I wouldn't trust stuff like it could have been something terrible. I don't open stuff like that again. It might, yeah, scary.
I forget where I was going with that sentence. It was something I was
Oh, you were
watching, and
talking about kind of the behind the scenes of Adam West and how this stuck with him.
yeah, just him. Because I didn't realize, like, I knew that this was sort of a popular series at the time. Apparently, it was like a national phenomenon,
Oh
at
yeah.
least according to the behind the scenes stuff on the DVD. Like, for whatever reason, this just was everywhere. Everyone loved this show. So the fact that it became such a huge thing, I can see why it would have been hard for people to not see Adam West as Batman because it apparently was such a huge cultural phenomenon that it just iconic. The same thing happens today with anybody who gets such a huge role. It's just like they're forever known as this one thing, and it can be hard to shake that one thing that everyone knows and loves them for.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I'm sure even William Shatner to this day, I mean, he hasn't played, I guess he played Kurt across the years, but he's done so much other stuff and this is like that's what he's known for.
Hmm. I think most like we've been all over the place, so we're obviously not talking about it in any order. I think a lot of my notes are just things that stuck out to me as ridiculous. Like of the many helicopter chases that happened, the one they're hit by a missile and they're crashing, but then they're saved by crashing into a foam rubber wholesale convention.
The thing is, that's an across the board thing that happens all the time. Like, yeah.
This is the thing. Like when I went back through my notes, I found that literally all of my notes were just like, I love this. I love this. I love this. I think it's great. I love this. And then at the very end, I just went, I love this. It could have probably been edited a bit shorter, but otherwise it's great.
I think my notes are like 50% ridiculous things that were just hilarious and 50% confusing, ridiculous things. Just like everything about the bad guy's plans were just so convoluted. And like if you try to overthink it, it doesn't make sense. Like, why does the penguin gas only affect good guys? Like he and his cohorts are completely unfazed by this noxious, horrid looking gas that he's spraying everywhere.
And that gas in multiple colors makes so many appearances throughout like the entire series.
I had to wonder, like, what is that stuff? I bet it's not something we would want to be breathing in, even if it's not deadly.
I'm not sure 100%, but yeah, you're
Pure
probably right.
dehydrated counselors.
Oh, yeah. That is one. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
It just makes me think of like people used to use asbestos for everything in old movies, and turns out it was killing them.
Yeah. I did actually have a really random question. With Commodore Schmidlap, when it's obviously Penguin, and they're like, "Yeah, it's obviously Penguin." They take him back into town, and then he takes off with the car. It's like there would have been easier ways to follow him. There's trackers and things like that. Like
it's just everything about it is so convoluted. Like at one point, Robin says something about they need to get a taxi, and Batman says it'll be easier or quicker on foot. So then they're just running through the town, giving the bad guys plenty of time to sneak into this boardroom and dehydrate all the world leaders while they're arguing with each other, completely unaware that each of them are one by one disappearing before their eyes.
I think we should take a step back on that scene as well and just acknowledge that whilst those world leaders are arguing, four completely cartoonish, strange villains wander into the room with a dehydration unit, and no one even bats an eye or turns their head to acknowledge their existence. Like, if the Joker alone walked into the room, I would probably at least pass him a glance and go, oh, it's just some weirdo, and keep going. The fact you had a man dressed as a penguin, a man wearing an entire question mark filled leotard, a clown, and a woman in a cat costume, and a giant dehydration machine all pushed into the room, and they just didn't even, register.
This is why at some point I just had to be like, this is not going to make sense. Stop overthinking it. This is ridiculous.
Yes.
There's no way that this can make sense. If that's
you are
not
correct,
the
point. And I guess you could go with the idea that the city has seen so much weird stuff because of just the nature of Gotham and all of the supervillains and such. I suppose you could say that it just becomes routine. Like that's the only logical thing I came to with it.
Well, then you'd have to wonder why all the world leaders are not faced because they don't live in Gotham.
Fair, but they work in Gotham, I suppose. I don't know, but
they probably have their own regional variants.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I just want to take a second, and obviously you don't get a ton of Commissioner Gordon or Chief O'Hara in this, but like you get into the actual series, and they are, I don't even know, like they're not incompetent by any stretch, but they're like, oh, we could take care of this, but we're just gonna let Batman and Robin do it. It's such a it's one of those things in the series that just makes you go, okay, cool.
I also thought it was interesting that Batman and Robin apparently work for the police.
Yeah,
like
it's made a big deal of that. They're duly deputized,
fully deputized agents of the law.
Yeah,
that was the line. And because at first I was like, because like you have the scene of them like flying over the city, and there's this one guy looking up, says, gives a feller a good feeling to know they're up there doing their job. And I thought to myself, they're vigilantes. They're not doing their job. They're doing the police's job. But then later, the police say they're fully deputized agents of the law. And I was like, well, okay, then. They were doing their job, I guess.
And I think the reason they did that was you look at comic book code at the time, and they had to kind of work within the scope of the law to be able to be. And I know that this wasn't specifically comic book oriented, but being that it was basically based off comic book, they probably had to make light of that. So it was understood that the cops are doing their job, but Batman and Robin are allowed by the cops. They're part of the force. They're clearly good guys, and they are, approved of by the powers that be.
Which makes sense. I just thought it was interesting.
Oh no,
because
it is.
I'm so used to Batman being a vigilante working outside the law, and the police just kind of have to go with it. And some are fine with it because he helps, but he's not part of the police. But now he is, and they made a big deal about that, which I thought was funny.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely kind of an outlier in the grand scheme of Batman media.
I also thought it was funny that they decided to have pirates be the hench people, and they had like regular pirate names like Bluebeard. Like I don't know that's from, was that from the comics, or is that just a weird thing they wanted to do for this movie?
So every time they do villain, like anytime, so obviously every episode they'll have a different villain, and whatever the scheme is, the villains were kind of built around that. So like if it's an ice cream thing, they would have like chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, whatever. They kind of match whatever the scheme is, and being that it was based off of a ship being like taken away, it was kind of based off of that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because like I said, I grew up with Batman the Animated Series, so I'm used to the hench people being themed after the villain that they work for. So like the Joker would have clown henchmen, and yeah, so it just seemed very random that they have pirates working for them. But that does make sense.
Yeah, so it could also be based off of the villain, but for specific ones, if there was a specific thing, they would have something like that. So like, and because how many times could you do, like if you had, so if they had like a special guest villain where it was a one-off, it would be more based around them. So like if it's Egghead, they would have like, I don't remember what his guys' names were, but it could be like hard-boiled, scrambled, whatever as names. But if it's a reoccurring one, they would change it based on whatever the case was. So it was it wasn't like a hard and fast by any stretch, but
I know generally as well the Penguin tends to have like a little penguin army as well that kind of help, but I think the 66 budget wouldn't have stretched to raiding all the zoos in LA to to realize that.
They could have just had guys and called them penguins, like put some face paint on them. It also made me laugh that he called for guinea pigs, and then it was five guys in shirts that said GP. Like they're guinea pigs in the sense that they were going to be tested on, but the way they were talking, I thought they were going to literally use guinea pigs for this test. And then it turned out to be much more horrifying.
yes. I suppose I looked at it like a cartoon. Like if you were to watch, say, Wile E. Coyote, and he falls off a cliff, gets hit by a bunch of rock and explodes, you'd think nothing of it.
No,
and that's just kind of the way that this rolled too.
Yes, I think if this had been a cartoon, I would not have given that a second thought. Not at all. The fact that it was live action just made me question the implications of evaporating these guys. And then they literally die by the end, or potentially end up in an alternate universe. The way they phrased that made me think that maybe they ended up somewhere else. But yeah, just if you think too hard about it, the implications are horrifying.
Oh yeah. And that like a lot of Twilight Zone, like if you think beyond the scope of what the actual episode is saying, a lot of those episodes are the same way. They're just like, if you think about this, oh my God, it gets dark quickly. But in this case, it's meant to kind of keep within that bit. So
yeah, it was meant to be ridiculous. I don't think they thought about people like me overthinking the implications of evaporating humans and potentially either killing or zapping them to another universe.
Yes.
I also wondered why again, overthinking it, why are the bad guys, when they get turned into dust, it's gray dust, but when the world leaders get turned into dust, it's all sorts of multicolored rainbow dust.
Because um the guys were the henchmen were just boring.
Yeah. It's based on creative flair.
Yeah. But the just imagine the cleanup after Schmidlap comes through there and sneezes all of the dust all over the place. It's like you get some poor like housekeeper in there to like vacuum all the dust, and like one of them shows back up and he's missing half an ear or half an arm or whatever.
When that happened, I didn't like how could I have foreseen that Batman would have a magical dust separation super molecular whatever to pull them apart. I thought that they were going to just pour some water on them and then they'd all come back mixed up.
It comes back like the Thing monster or something.
Yeah.
The implications would be too horrifying.
Yeah.
I don't know if this was supposed to be funny or not, but they had played up this potential romance between Batman and Kitka, who's Catwoman in disguise. But then they have the whole scene where her identity is revealed. And then there's this long shot of Batman's shocked face while sad music plays. And I was like, what is this?
It's Batman's only true love. It goes to show that he can't take on love because there's greater things he must do.
It hit him so hard the actress was replaced.
I will say, like, the way that, like, when his hands are tied behind his back and he's as Bruce Wayne in the evil guy's lair, like, some of the acting there comes off as probably some of the most emotional that you see out of in my remembrances, at least, of Adam West as Bruce Wayne. Like, you never really see him get very emotional about everything. It's pretty even keeled.
That's true. He also threatened to directly to kill them,
Yes.
which I thought was strange because, like, I mean, they've changed it now, but like when I was growing up, it was a thing that Batman never kills. So I thought it was interesting that in the 60s version, which should potentially be more innocent than even the one that I grew up with, he directly threatens to murder them.
It's such a strange movie because it kind of plays on both sides. Like, it is not violent by any stretch, but it does, like you said, it sort of implies like goofy, weird, 60s level violence. But then on the other side, you've got Robin and Alfred in a mask driving him around. And at one point, while, Bruce awkwardly kisses Kitka, they turn it off because it's just, he deserves privacy.
I like the fact that Robin is so against the idea of checking back in once he's turned the camera off, but he's like, okay, I guess we'll just sneak a peek. We'll just...
That whole scene was so ridiculous. Not that that's any different than the entire movie. It was just like, oh, good grief. Also, I'm sure it's explained somewhere in the series, but is Alfred supposed to be married? Because there was an old woman
Oh,
with
okay.
him.
So so in the first couple of episodes of the Batman series, which it's been a long time since I've seen it, so I'm quoting from memory here, so bear with me. I apologize if I'm slightly off. But that's Aunt Harriet. She's a character that I don't, if she shows up anywhere else, it's very, very rare that she will. But that's either Bruce's Aunt Harriet or Robin's Aunt Harriet.
Mm.
And she's like sort of made sort of like support system. I think she was probably put in there by the network just to have a female like presence in the house. So it wasn't just three males living together without like some kind of a female presence, I think. But she's like, she cooks, she cleans, she's kind of emotional support. Occasionally she gets kidnapped. But you don't see a ton of her, and you really didn't see a ton of her here. Like, the first scene was literally the only place she shows up.
I think she was in a scene towards the end too, but I don't know that she said anything. She was just
There, yeah.
with Alfred.
Yeah.
And I thought she was gonna be somebody, and then okay, she not, I guess.
She is someone, but not in the movie. She's kind of like Chief O'Hara. Like he says a few things, but his role is a little bit larger than what you see here.
Okay.
Yeah. I think without her as well, wouldn't it have been a very male-oriented film, basically? Because I think there's only two, maybe three women apart from, unless you count the two who are eating crab,
Yeah.
um,
I mean,
in the
they are
in
quite
the whole
stand
film.
out. I mean, and so I think it's in season 2, they introduced Batgirl, who was played by Yvonne Craig. I think that was her name. Anyway, um, and she shows up. I think it's one of the first times you actually see Batgirl as a character. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's quite interesting when they add her into the mix.
I looked up Aunt Harriet, and on the Batman wiki, it says that she's the paternal aunt of Bruce Wayne's ward, Dick Grayson. So
Okay,
she's Robin's aunt.
okay, got it.
But it doesn't look like she's been in anything else because it just has the TV series. Like she was in the comics before the TV series, but the TV series is the only time she's ever been adapted into either live action or animation. So that's why I've never heard of her because she's never been in anything that I've seen.
I'm just looking here at Batgirl, and not that she plays into this, but so she was created in 1961. She became popular in 66. So when she was introduced.
Hmm.
So
That feels like somebody that they should bring back for something, just as like, because like I like it when they bring obscure comic characters into shows, even just for like an episode. I feel like they should do that and bring her back for something.
and Harriet,
Yeah.
yeah, that would be cool.
Hmm.
Which I'm actually surprised like she hasn't shown up a time or two more, but I suppose they go so hard into like most of the series are very serious and it's kind of implied, okay, Batman is alone, Dick is alone, all they have is each other and the kind of people that they meet along the way. To give him an aunt would maybe take away from it, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but
That's true. Yeah. It is kind of weird that he ends up with Batman if he had family that he could have gone to.
yeah. Did you enjoy all the random vehicles that showed up? Like you got the Bat Copter, the Bat Boat, the Bat Cycle with the little sidecar that like disengages and like rolls Robin up to the side up to his side of the Bat Copter.
That was such a random addition to that thing. Like they could have stopped and got off and walked around the side of the helicopter. They didn't really need to launch him so that he ends up on that side. It seemed like this is really extra.
So
I love the Penguin submarine, and I love the fact that
Oh, yes. That was my favorite vehicle.
and I love the fact that they had the time to change a post-nuclear submarine into a penguin-shaped submarine. Like somebody painted and built that in universe.
With little feet
Um,
that help it swim.
oh yeah.
yeah.
Also, for whatever reason, they gave it a goose head instead of a periscope. And like you have that whole scene with them like trying to find a clue on the buoy. And like they're being watched by this periscope for the longest time and nobody notices. And suddenly it's like, hey, look, we're being watched.
And the fact that the little like they shape the camera or like what the camera is seeing like it's looking out of the mouth of the penguin and it's got that whole like kind of an oval shape to it. That was pretty great.
Oh, it's so ridiculous.
Like there's a weird amount of attention to detail in here and I love that part.
Yeah. I started looking up to see if any of these things had been recreated in Lego. It's like I want these in Lego.
Oh,
The car,
totally.
the car definitely has, but it's retired, so I'd have to spend a lot of money to get it on eBay. But I want that submarine. That probably has not been made in Lego. That seems too obscure. But somebody should make that thing in Lego because I want the submarine. That helicopter would also be a good candidate for being made in Lego.
Oh, that would be cool.
The Batboat had Hot Wheels written all over it.
Yeah, the colors especially, it felt like a Hot Wheels car.
Mm.
How did you guys feel about the fact that they were trying to sink the sub by or not sink the sub? They were trying to get them to surface, but they essentially destroyed the entire sub.
When when he was shooting down at the submarine, I was like, there's like how many innocent people that have been evaporated or whatever. But like you're risking like 10 people's lives for four, maybe seven or eight if you're counting the pirates. I think that was probably one of the things that you're not supposed to think too hard about.
No, definitely not.
It's just a show. You should really just relax.
I was just gonna say.
I think you have to probably say that to yourself through most of this movie and probably the TV series as well. This is not really a show you can watch if you're going to be like me and overthink everything.
Oh yeah, you absolutely have to go into this with an open mind. But if you allow yourself that, it is such
Yeah.
a goofy, weird, fun series. I don't know. It's
Just know going in, it's ridiculous and it's a live action cartoon.
oh yeah,
Mm.
every part of it. And it was a thing of its era, but if if you can and allow yourself that, it's so worth it. It's I grew up on this. It was one of my favorite shows, and it gets better with age because you start to see those things that you didn't see as a kid
Mm.
because it's so cheeky.
Oh, I forgot one ridiculous thing that I had to mention. Like I've said, a lot of this is like them trying to solve a mystery and then figuring out through the weirdest roundabout way and always being exactly right for whatever reason. But like the worst, weirdest, most convoluted one was it happened at sea. Sea for Catwoman.
That whole that whole figuring out of that, it's like, and you talked about it before where it was like the riddles were so weird and goofy, but that whole bit right there was just like, what were they smoking? I'm not sure if it's the good or the bad stuff.
I think somebody just was ridiculous and they were allowed to be ridiculous and they're like, okay, I'm just gonna go all in on ridiculous. Another thing that you can't think too hard on is how the magic fire pole that dressed them in their bat costumes worked. Because they jump on the fire pole and by the time they get to the bottom, they're all dressed up.
I just imagine someone getting like their underwear stuck on something and they've got like the world's worst wedgie.
That seems like something that would be a parody. Like Robin gets to the bottom and he's like looking around like, where's Batman? Then he looks up and Batman's just hanging by a hook that snagged the back of his underwear and he can't get down.
Alfred has to prep that every morning. Otherwise, if they go down without the batsuit there, they just arrive naked. Weirdly, if they go down naked, they just come down with no skin on. It's very surreal.
Also, when they're trying to get all the world leaders back into their individual vials, I love the fact that they have their full costumes on, and then they have gloves over their gloves, and they have the kind of smocks over their uniforms. And every time Batman goes to get on the phone, he's got to whip off the entire dual glove thing. It's just
There's so much that is just so convoluted, but purposely so.
oh yeah. Like I don't know why those decisions were made, but they were made with purpose.
Yes. The only purpose that I can think of is that they wanted to just be as ridiculous as they were allowed to be.
They knew that 59 years down the way, there would be a podcast where three people would be like, we don't know. They just wanted to confuse two Iowans and a guy from the UK.
And they largely succeeded.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm confused, but I laughed, so they did
Good.
something right.
That's all you need to do.
Oh, yes.
I much prefer that to other movies we've talked about where I'm confused and I don't ever want to see this again. This at least had redeeming value, and yes, I'm confused, but in a good way. It's ridiculous and purposely so, and just ridiculous for ridiculousness sake, which I like things that are ridiculous,
Yes, you do. And we love you for it.
Oh, yes.
even when they have a little bit of existential horror and they're like contemplating too hard about what happened to the 5 guinea pigs. Well, I think that's all my notes. We didn't talk about anything in order, but I think I've hit all of the things that I wanted to specifically point out that I noticed.
Good.
Same. Like I say, when I went back through all my notes, it literally just said, oh, I love this. Oh, I love that. Oh, that's great, that is. And there was nothing that I turned around and went, oh, I didn't like that. There was nothing that I could bring in that was like, I've got something here that I can raise. It was just I enjoyed it from start to finish, all the way through. And anything that I wasn't 100% on was negligible in terms of, changes or differences. I just had a really good time with this one.
Hmm.
And I always just enjoy revisiting this series in any form that it comes up. It's such a fun, just outside the box thing, and it's so unique for Batman, especially nowadays. Like everything kind of follows a similar path,
Hmm.
and it's nice to see something, even though it's outside the box and it's weird. That there's so many great moments that are either in meme form or just when they come up, you go, "Oh, that's cool! There's the thing." It's I live for those moments because it is something so of its time, but yet it's still something that a lot of people love because it is so different.
It kind of makes me wish that they would make not necessarily this series again, but like do something with Batman that leans a little bit more into the silly, like live action specifically, because I know we've had silly Batman semi recently with Batman the Brave and the Bold, which that was silly, but it was a cartoon. I kind of want a live action Batman that's not afraid to be a bit ridiculous.
Hmm.
I haven't watched the most recent one with Robert Pattinson. I
Oh no,
know
it's
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 going to be
it's
dark.
grim. It's grim. It's really interesting. Like it's I really enjoyed the take on it. Like it is the most built in this world of the ones you will see. Like, you look at Nolan's trilogy and it was kind of built in this world, but this one is down to the letter built in this world, and they do a lot of great things with it. But yeah, in this particular respect, that there's nothing out there that's live action that's like this. And I don't know,
Yeah.
like I kind of feel I don't know. There's a lot of people that love this, but I think they love it because it's like a legacy media thing. If you
Yeah.
tried to make something new that wasn't cartoon based, I don't know if people would be okay with that or not. Like I don't it's not a Marvel thing. People they got called out for trying to go a more humorous angle with the DCEU. I'm not sure how that would work.
I think if you got the tone of the humor right, I
Yeah.
don't necessarily know if it would work in a film capacity, but I think if you could do maybe like a TV series that was a bit more tongue in cheek and you got the right tone of writer in, you could probably do something really fun with this. Like, I still think that it's a fully untapped mine, and I think that since the last time they tried this, which was the '60s, I think a lot has kind of changed. That means you could do a live action, more comedy oriented Batman show, and it would be, you know, fine, fun, enjoyable.
I know for the most part in more recent years, people kind of have it on their minds that superhero stuff needs to be more serious, but like the idea of superheroes in general is kind of inherently silly. Just like grown adults dressing up in colorful clothes, usually tights, going out and punching clowns. It's it's kind of ridiculous. And like I like a lot of the serious stuff. Like I grew up with Batman the Animated Series, which is a serious show. Like it had moments of humor. Like the Joker is ridiculous, but the Joker can also be scary. Like he's legitimately dangerous. And you don't need to completely shy away from that. I think you can find a balance. Be as serious as you need to be, but just add some more ridiculous stuff that shows that the idea of superheroes is ridiculous. Just add a little bit more fun because like I'm not to hopefully not get a certain breed of fans in here to be haters, but like I am not a fan of the Zack Snyder stuff. It's just too dark, too grim. Just it like you don't need to like go full onto this level of Batman ridiculousness, but like just a bit of it.
There has to be some balance.
Yeah,
Hmm.
Yeah.
just a little bit of ridiculousness would go a long way, I think. I feel like we've had so many years of just grim superheroes. It'd be fun to have something that knows that it's fun. That's one thing that I really liked about Guardians of the Galaxy, and I feel like they toe that line well. They went a little grim in the most recent one, but in a necessary way because of what they were
Yeah.
dealing with. But I feel like for the most part, the Guardians of the Galaxy gets that balance pretty spot on for what I would want.
Yeah.
It's serious when it needs to be, but it's also ridiculous when you want it to be.
not that it's helpful in this respect because it is another cartoon thing, but the Harley Quinn series did a really good job balancing that just insanity with some really well done storytelling. And I would even
Hmm.
say Birds of Prey or Suicide, like the second Suicide Squad is specifically did a nice job. And again, those are more dark. They're definitely there's a lot of gore and death and completely and utterly what the hell is that thing? But
I
it
will
does.
Suicide Squad. Like, normally, I'm not a gore person. I'm not like Suicide Squad on paper sounds like something that I would not be interested in, but I watched it and I loved it.
Oh yeah, no, it's frankly the second one. The first one's okay. The second one is freaking hilarious. Like
It was so good.
yeah, I laugh my butt off every time I've seen it. And I've seen it quite a few times, like even when stuff is coming. The characters are outrageous, the villain is outrageous, everything that happens.
Hmm.
It is the closest that we've gotten to, for me, like if you're talking a movie, it feels like it's the closest thing to Batman, like the 60s Batman that we've had.
In a way, kind of. Like, it's a lot more dark and serious, but in a way, the ridiculous and just outrageous nature of what they're dealing with does kind of it would kind of fit along that with this in a way.
Right. I mean, just given
Hmm.
the like I don't think you're going to see something that's that level of Batman again just because the 60s from a certain perspective was that silly and there was a lot of other
Yeah.
movies and shows that kind of reflected that carefree man love man peace man kind of mentality.
Hmm.
But for the 20 what was it, the early 2020s that it came out or late 20 teens, when it came out, that was kind of the equivalent of joyful, crazy, and silly that to the culture of that time, I feel like.
Hmm.
And I suppose you could kind of say that for the third, well, like the late 80s, early 90s Batman series between Joel Schumacher and Burton. I feel like you kind of get that. It does kind of have that same feel, but I don't think it goes as far as what Suicide Squad or the original Bat or the 66 Batman did. And again, that could be me just being uninformed, but we're being biased, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't speak to that because I haven't seen them yet, but
Fair.
one of these days
They are
we
fun.
should catch up. I want to catch
Yeah,
because Dan had said he hadn't seen that either, the
Mm.
80s Batman. So, yeah, we should do more of these because there's, as much as I think of myself as, yeah, I like Batman, I'm a Batman fan, there's a lot of Batman that I've never seen.
well, I think that's true of anybody. Like,
Mm.
there's a lot of Batman animated stuff I've never seen. Like, I remember watching the 90s Batman series as a kid, but it's
Mhm.
been years since I've seen anything in that respect.
It's so good. I haven't rewatched it very recently, but I have rewatched it since I was a kid. I've watched it as an adult, and it holds up very well.
Oh yeah. Well, it was done with care and love and attention to detail.
Hmm.
And for as goofy as
Mm.
this is, there are a few episodes that kind of go, but by and large, if you can turn off your brain, I don't even know if that's the case. If you can look past the because it's can't like the production values when you get into the actual show can get a little but I think that there's a lot of good and a lot of fun stuff to see in that series. Like
Hmm.
if you watch this and you have any interest at all in the series, it's definitely one to get into because it feels less bridled. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens, but it's all funny and weird. And some of the third season gets a little wonky. You could tell that they were running out of money, but it is still there's a lot of scenes where it's kind of weird. Like they'll be they're in a layer, but there's no background. It's just random windows put up against a black curtain or whatever. They
Hmm.
get a little funky, but it still holds to kind of it's like a black box theater kind of a thing.
So less budget than just showing a big splash in the water and saying an octopus exploded.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that will probably be all for Batman the movie. We will be back in the future for more, perhaps even more Batman. But until then, do you want to let people know where they can find you if they want more from you, Nikki?
You can find me here on YouTube. It's at Trivial Theater. I do random, obscure, straight up bad movies. Depending upon when this goes up, I will either be in the middle of Riffstravaganza, which is PSA riffs with friends of the channel as well as fellow creators, or I'll be doing normal film reviews. So stop by, say hi.
Okay, Dan.
And thank you once again for having me on, Jonathan. Much appreciated. You can find me on YouTube under TYTD Reviews. We have new reviews coming out weekly covering cult classics and strange cinema. You can also find me on Letterboxd and on Twitter under TYTD Reviews as well. So please drop by and say hi.
Okay, well, we will see you again soon.
Looking forward to it.
Oh, yes.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and follow my co-hosts as well. My link tree and all of our links will be in the description below. If you want more of my content, all my podcasts are available on YouTube as well as most podcast platforms. If you enjoyed this show, check out one of the other podcasts or check out my Patreon for bonus and extended episodes you won't find anywhere else. We'll be back soon with another brand new episode, so thanks for listening and we'll see you next time.